Sit In, How Four Friends Stood Up by Sitting Down by Andrea Davis Pinkney, illustrated by Brian Pinkney. We must meet hate with love. These were Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words that got them started. 4 hungry friends, eager to eat. Each took a seat at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. David, Joseph Franklin, and Ezell sat quiet and still, with hearts full of hope. With Dr. King's words strong and close, they were college students with a plan. It was February 1st, 1960. They didn't need menus. Their order was simple: a donut and coffee with cream on the side. Woolworth's was busy, so the friends waited, patiently, silently, without a fuss. They were the only black kids at the counter. David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezell sat while everyone else got served. At first, they were treated like the hole in a donut, invisible. Others tried to ignore them. The waitress watched and refused them. This was a sign of the times: whites only. This was the law's recipe for segregation. Its instructions were easy to follow. Do not combine white people with black people. Segregation was a bitter mix. Now it was the friends' turn to ignore and refuse. They ignored the law and refused to leave until they were served. Those kids had a recipe too, a new brew called integration. It was just as simple: combine black with white to make sweet justice. For them, integration was better than any chef's special. Integration was finer than any homemade cake. Integration was a recipe that would take time. So David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezell sat quiet and still, with hearts full of hope, with Dr. King's words strong and close. Be loving enough to absorb evil. They sat straight and proud, and waited and wanted a donut and coffee with cream on the side. After sitting and waiting and wanting, a police officer came, but the 4 friends wouldn't leave. The police officer didn't know what to do. The students were doing nothing wrong. No crime in sitting, no harm in being quiet, no danger in looking hungry. The officer left the lunch counter without doing anything. The Woolworths man turned off the lights. He announced, "Woolworths is closed." So the customers left, including the 4 friends, who went home to dinner, where they were served first. News had already spread about the sit-in. David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezell got their names in the paper. The next day, February 2nd, 1960, more students showed up at the lunch counter, sitting for what was right. No reservations needed at Woolworth's. The students seated themselves. They were dressed in their best clothes. They were polite and determined. No guesswork for the waitress. The young people knew the menus by heart. They ordered. No food came. So they sat in silence and waited and wanted a donut and coffee with cream on the side. The waitress reminded them, whites only. But those kids wouldn't budge. They didn't move. Until they were served, they refused. All they wanted was some food, a donut and coffee with cream on the side. To pass the time, the students read their school books. They wrote in their journals. They finished their homework. They didn't need to read the menu, so they studied for tomorrow's test. What had started in Greensboro spread faster than a grease fire. There were lunch counter protests in Hampton, Virginia, Nashville, Tennessee, Montgomery, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and many other southern towns. If lunch counters could go from whites only to all welcome, if segregation could turn into integration, if black and white people could break bread together, everyone would pass the test. Everybody would score high, A+ with that coffee and cream on the side. But many folks were not motivated to make that grade. As the sit-in grew, angry people gave the students a big dose of hatred, served up hot and heaping. Coffee poured down their backs, milkshakes flung in their faces, pepper thrown into their eyes, ketchup not on the fries, but dumped on their heads. They yelled at the students, "We don't serve your kind. Go home. Goodbye." The students wanted to lash out, but couldn't. They wanted to strike back, but didn't. Sitting still was so hard. Practicing peace while others showed hatred was tougher than any school test. Now there were news cameras filming the sit-ins, and viewers at home watching it all on TV. The students were more determined than ever to show the world the true meaning of peace. So they sat in silence, with hearts full of hope, with Dr. King's dream true and close. These were the words that kept them going. We must meet violence with non-violence. The students sat proud and still and waited and wanted a donut and coffee with cream on the side. Soon the sit-ins grew bigger and wider. White students joined their black friends to protest the unfair treatment by restaurant owners who would not serve food to black patrons. They also opposed segregated libraries, buses, parks, and pools. With so many students gathered, people got scared there would be fighting. They were afraid of all those youngsters grouped together for a cause. Even though the students were committed to peace, the police now took action. They accused the students of loafing. They arrested them. They took them to jail. The students did not resist. They didn't fight. Instead, they sang freedom songs to keep the peace. They held Dr. King's words steady and close. Demonstrate calm dignity. Soon folks were so busy arguing about who was right and who was wrong that they stopped going to Woolworths and other segregated places. Some shops were forced to integrate just to keep their businesses alive. But the struggle was far from over. In April, an activist named Ella Baker organized a student leadership conference at Shaw University in North Carolina to help the young demonstrators. With Ella, the students formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. Inspired by Dr. King, they came up with powerful words of their own. These are the words that became the SNCC slogan. We are all leaders. When President John F. Kennedy got a taste of SNCC's integration, he didn't sit in, he stepped in. On June 11th, 1963, the president went on TV. He urged Americans to treat each other fairly. He then told Congress to take action against segregation. This became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. On July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson made the act a law. It banned segregation in public places. The hard work and courage of all those brave students paid off. They had taken a bite out of segregation. Now it was time to savor equality. Now they were ready for a big sip of freedom. Their order was simple: a double dose of peace with nonviolence on top. Hold the hate. Leave off the injustice. Now the students had the right recipe for integration. The steps were easy to follow. 1. Start with love. 2. Add conviction. 3. Season with hope. 4. Add extra faith to flavor. 5. Mix black people with white people. 6. Let unity stand. 7. Fold in the change. 8. Sprinkle with dignity. 9. Bake until golden. 10. Serve immediately. Makes enough for all. After weeks of sitting when their backsides ached, after months of being still when their feet fell asleep, after years of praying for laws to change, when they were so hungry for equality, the young people finally got what they ordered. It was worth the wait. It was served to them exactly how they wanted it. Well done. And integration sure tasted good. Those courageous young people enjoyed every bit. They came back to Woolworths for seconds and thirds and many helpings after that. When the sit-ins were all done, the students left a big tip: a donut and coffee with cream on the side is not about the food. It's about pride. These were the words that filled them up. Civil Rights Timeline. The Greensboro sit-ins were one of many events that comprised a time in America's history known as the Civil Rights Movement, a series of happenings in which people came together to end racial discrimination. Here is a timeline of important civil rights moments that came before and after the Greensboro sit-ins and that led to equality among people. May 17, 1954. The Supreme Court rules segregation in public schools unconstitutional in the landmark case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. This ruling allows black and white children to attend school together. December 1st, 1955. Rosa Parks, an African-American seamstress, refuses to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa's bravery sparks the Montgomery bus boycotts, during which African-American citizens refused to ride city buses for more than 1 year. On December 21st, 1956, buses became desegregated after a Supreme Court ruling. January to February of 1957. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helps establish the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and becomes its first president. The SCLC serves as a driving force in the civil rights movement, using nonviolence as its basis. September 1957. 9 black students in Little Rock, Arkansas, enroll in Central High School despite being barred from entry by Arkansas's Governor Orville Faubus. When President Eisenhower sends in the National Guard, the students, who come to be known as the Little Rock Nine, are allowed to enter. February 1st, 1960. The Greensboro sit-ins begin. April 1960. Ella Baker helps found the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee at Shaw University. July 25th through 26, 1960. Woolworths in Greensboro is desegregated. 1961. May 4th. Freedom rides start when more than 1,000 student volunteers, both black and white, travel on buses throughout the South to test laws that prohibit segregation. Supported by SNCC and the Congress on Racial Equality, CORE, the students are often met by violence. October 1st, 1962. President John F. Kennedy sends thousands of federal troops to help drive back angry mobs at the University of Mississippi, where James Meredith is the first African-American student to register. April 16th, 1963. After being arrested and put in jail during a protest in Birmingham, Alabama, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writes his letter from Birmingham jail, in which he underscores the importance of justice. May 2nd through 4th, 1963. Thousands of school children in Birmingham, Alabama, march in the Children's Crusade, a protest of the arrest and jailing of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. August 28th, 1963. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his world-famous "I Have a Dream" speech, while hundreds of thousands of listeners gather at the Lincoln Memorial as part of the March on Washington. July 2nd, 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlaws racial segregation in schools and public places, is signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. A final helping. Pictured here left to right, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, William Smith, and Clarence Henderson, who sat at Woolworth's lunch counter on the second day of the sit-ins. David Lionel Richmond, Joseph Alfred McNeil, Franklin Eugene McCain, and Ezel A. Blair Jr., now known as Jabril Kazan, were students at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, a historically black college. Frustrated by segregation and eager to bring about a change, they sparked a series of sit-ins that lasted for a period of years and spread from the South to the northern and western states throughout America. By August 1961, more than 70,000 people took part in sit-ins. They were black and white, men and women, young and old, all passionate about the cause for equal rights. These sit-ins closely followed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s strong belief in bringing about social change through nonviolence. Dr. King's conviction in the peaceful resolution of conflicts was inspired by the teachings of Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi, who believed that freedom could be won with peace. Dr. King carried this message publicly when he outlined the nonviolent protest approach as a means to guide participants in the Montgomery bus boycotts of 1955 and 1956. Dr. King's words served as guides for future protests, marches, rallies, and the sit-ins that began in Greensboro, North Carolina. Some disagree with Dr. King's philosophy, though many embraced its value in moving civil rights forward. Ella Baker, an activist employed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, worked alongside Dr. King on several civil rights initiatives. With Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, she organized the Crusade for Citizenship, a voter registration campaign that took place on February 12, 1958, and encouraged Black people to vote. 2 years later, Ella mentored the college students who were involved in the sit-ins, and helped them organize. The 3-day student leadership conference that took place at Shaw University in April 1960 hosted more than 200 students from all over the South. During the conference, the students formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, to keep the cause for equality pressing onward. In June 1960, Ella wrote an article for the Southern Patriot newspaper, which said, "Sit-ins and other demonstrations are concerned with something much bigger than a hamburger or even a giant-sized Coke. Negro and white students, North and South, are seeking to rid America of the scourge of racial segregation and discrimination, not only at lunch counters, but in every aspect of life." One of the most enjoyable parts of writing about real-life events is in the research involved and the details this research reveals. Like life itself, history in the making is not a perfect science, and interviews and oral histories of the Greensboro sit-ins vary on the details. But thanks to these oral histories and information gathered from the International Civil Rights Center and Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, an institution devoted to preserving the memory of the Greensboro sit-ins, it was intriguing to learn about so many important aspects of the February 1960 protests, including that the Friends actually ordered a donut and coffee when they sat at the Woolworth's counter. During the sit-ins, the student demonstrators left Woolworth's each evening and returned the following day. The first set of 4 friends, David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezell, who became known as the Greensboro Four, sat down on February 1st, 1960. On February 2nd, 1960, more students joined the protest, including 2 young men named Clarence Henderson and William Smith, pictured here with Franklin McCain and Joseph McNeil. This was the beginning of a groundswell of friends coming together, making a difference, changing the world. Andrea Davis Pinkney.